I'm going to read Douglas Murray's article real quick. We're going to plow through it. At this point, I'm assuming that you have all seen this debate or pieces of it or clips of it, but this is Douglas Murray's response. And this is how these people are kind of handling this dissent within the ranks, or attempting to handle this dissent within the ranks through, propaganda and nonsense. So I had to clip the shit out of this to get it. Here's Douglas Murray's article. All right. Last week, I seemed to break the internet. I went back on the Joe Rogan podcast to talk about my new book on democracies and death cults, Israel and the future of civilization. And notice there's like a link to buy it right there, which is available at all good bookstores and on Audible, since you ask. So this whole thing is just this dude shilling his book, like trying to sell his book. And at the end of the day, that's probably why he's not making any valid arguments, because it's really a marketing campaign for you to read his book, which who would read this fucking idiot's book? I've been on Joe Rogan a number of times before, and I've always enjoyed it. Joe is a master of his art. A lot of people think they can talk casually but interestingly for hours. That's mainly because Joe makes it look so easy. But at this time, I went on with a question. Having spoken to Joe since the wars in Ukraine and Israel started, I had become increasingly irked that the guests he has on have been almost entirely anti-Ukraine and anti-Israel. That is that's complete bullshit. God Sod, Colton, what's that guy's name? Colton Hughes, or I've watched Eric Weinstein. I've watched constant people. He's had a long parade of pro-Israel people on his show. Mike Baker, like a bunch of these like cop type people. Even Jocko, is pretty pro-Israel. Like, I can't comment for Jocko. I haven't actually seen him say. But again, the idea that Joe Rogan doesn't platform pro-Israel people is fucking patently ridiculous out of the gate. So many of the latter, in particular, are not just vindictively and maliciously anti-Israel, but have been spewing claims that are demonstrably false. Have you been there? Attacks on Israel. One of these is a comedian who goes by the name of Dave Smith. Claiming some Jewish ancestry, he has spent 18 months since October 17th being very unfunny indeed. Claiming some Jewish ancestry. Okay, like what's... Douglas Murray, you have Jewish ancestry? Murray, is that a Jewish name? Specifically, he has decided to spend his time going around the podcast world sounding off about Israel. In the process, he largely cites people like him, people who have many views but no obvious expertise. People like Daryl Cooper, who says he isn't a historian yet has been invited onto some of the world's biggest podcasts as a historian. One of Cooper's many ahistorical claims is that Winston Churchill was the chief villain of World War II. On these and many other occasions, Cooper has simply lied about history. Now, I would ask Douglas Murray where he made that claim. Can you point to a video or a quote in his actual, report? Because the guy has done hours upon hours of podcasting on this. And this is the other thing that pisses me off about people that are just like, he's a Nazi. Like, have you actually listened to anything the guy actually says himself? Or are you just like, the bots in my comments said did the anti-Semitism, so he's a Nazi? No. Fucking Douglas Murray. God damn it. How can you be that dumb? When invited to debate the world's foremost living expert on Churchill last year, he declined, saying he didn't know enough to go against such a figure. Who is that? Yet still, Cooper gets invited on show after show to throw out falsehoods that he can't even back up, and on which his online viewers seem happy not to challenge him. Another such figure from the world of comedy who is changing his shape to fit the time is Joe Rogan guest Ian Carroll. So, okay, and this is a point Dave Smith made in his rebuttal, but this is a great example of what a fucking dumb prick Douglas Murray is. He thinks Daryl Cooper is a comedian. He also thinks Ian Carroll is a comedian. Neither of those guys are comedians. So already Douglas Murray himself is demonstrating a lack of expertise on the subject he's discussing in his article. That's a clear demonstration that he knows not a fucking thing that he's talking about here. Ian Carroll is a comedian, and so is Daryl Cooper. I'm a fucking pompous British cunt. Let's keep going, though. This is someone who, when he last went on Rogan's podcast, very carefully tried to minimize the evil of Adolf Hitler. Outrageously and completely false, Carroll claimed that in the 1930s, Hitler had kept his anti-Semitism down. A provably false claim that Rogan did nothing to counter. So actually, that is not a provably false claim. And what he was saying is that Hitler downplayed his anti-Semitism to increase recruiting numbers because it was starting to alienate a lot of people. So he kind of did keep it a little secret. Now, I would argue that most like I've never known a racist who was quiet about it. There's not like secret racists who are like, yeah, I'm just going to like pretend to be accepting and kind. And then once they least expect it, the mask is going to come off and I'm going to be like, yeah, I'm really a racist. Yeah, gotcha. First of all, racists aren't smart enough to do that. But second of all, what would be the point? This is someone who, when he tried carefully to minimize, outrageously and completely falsely, Carroll claimed that in the 1930s, Hitler had kept his anti-Semitism down. A provably false claim that Rogan did nothing to counter. All these men have also been palling around online with Holocaust deniers and proud anti-Semites like Jake Shields. I don't know if you remember this, but during the Iraq hysteria, who was it that said palling around with terrorists? Maybe it was Sarah Palin about Obama or something. McCain-Palin campaign. That was it. Palin defends Obama terrorist comment. So it was Sarah Palin who said Obama's palling around with terrorists. And here's Douglas Murray using the fucking Sarah Palin line. Palling around. All these men have been palling around with terrorists. I mean, online Holocaust deniers and proud anti-Semites like Jack Shields. Anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism.
You're an anti-Semite.
Now, how can you hold this man up as some kind of like great thinker? Imagine taking Douglas Murray serious as like this grand intellectual. You would have to be literally like Michael Rappaport levels of stupid to buy that shit.
You're an anti-Semite.
My bad on Rogan. 2 weeks ago, Rogan had his mate Dave Smith on yet again for a long podcast. But for my return to the show, the deal was that I would come on only if Dave Smith was once again in the studio, as if Joe didn't want to be unaccompanied, or that Joe thought I, of all his guests who must be challenged, I like a debate as much as the next Scotsman. But what resulted was more than a debate. Now, keep in mind, he agreed to this in advance. It's not like Joe Rogan sideswiped him and said, hey, I'm going to have Dave Smith on today now that like just out of the blue. Sorry, but I'm bringing this guy in to debate you. No, he presented this to him. Douglas Murray accepted it and then went on the show. And now he's bitching about it because he got his ass handed to him.
You're an anti-Semite.
It seems to have led to some kind of podcast world meltdown. Yeah, for you and your people.
You're an anti-Semite.
The first reason was that from the outset, I challenged Joe on his choice of guests and why he had been giving a platform to only one side of a debate.
You're an anti-Semite.
And a very conspiratorial one at that. Oh my God, this guy's such a twat.
You're an anti-Semite.
He is such a twat. He and Smith were immediately defensive, but the real problem came when I raised the question of the issue of expertise. Because, as I said then, and I've said often,
you're an anti-Semite.
We've lived through a period when the experts have gotten an awful lot of things wrong. From the COVID lab leak to the Hunter Biden laptop, we have lived through years after which the distrust of experts has become inevitable. Yet that doesn't mean expertise does not exist. No one's saying that, by the way. This is called a straw man. It does not mean that a comedian can simply hold himself out as a Middle East expert and should be listened to as if he has any body of work. No one's saying that either, except you, because you don't have a valid argument to make. So this is the straw man you have to set up to attack because you don't have any moral or intellectual high ground and you're a complete twat.
You're an anti-Semite.
It does not mean that someone who says they are not a historian but who practices false history should be called as a historian. The point seemed to rile both Smith and Rogan. No, it didn't seem to rile them. It's riled them because of how idiotic your response was. They said they agreed with you. Because many people seem to think that what I mean is that they are not allowed to have an opinion. That is wrong. I think they are. It's just that there should be a price to pay for spreading bullshit.
You're an anti-Semite.
Okay, so I assume in the next part of this rant, he's going to get into the specifics of the bullshit that they're spreading and debunk them for us because he's the expert. Have you been there? If I had gone on Rogan's podcast and held myself out as an expert in MMA fighting, I suspect he would have noticed. Okay, fair. If I had kept making mistake after mistake and shown ignorance piled upon ignorance, I think he'd say, hey, you don't seem to be very knowledgeable about this. Okay, yeah, true. And he'd be right. So why is it hard to grasp that something similar applies in other areas? It isn't. Just tell us what we're wrong about and educate us, Mr. Murray. In bigger rings and more important fights. Having spent most of the last 18 months in Israel, Gaza, Lebanon, and the Ukraine, I don't think I know everything. But I think I know a darn sight more than someone like comic Dave Smith, who admitted he'd never even been to the region he spends all his time talking about. He doesn't spend all his time talking about it, but it is something that we should be talking about. Oh, so you have to go to a country to comment on it, do you? Said part of this internet. Again, the answer is obviously not. But if it is your job or you're making it your job, then probably yes. No one's making it their job, man. Again, this is just a sign of how pathetic these people are and how they have no argument.
You're an anti-Semite.
If I filed columns for this paper pretending to be an expert on countries I'd never been to, I would expect my readers to complain. Yeah, that's why Dave Smith isn't writing articles for the New York Times as an expert on Palestine, as they should. If I filed columns about a war zone from the safety of West Palm Beach, I think it would be fraud. Journalism has had its own meltdown in recent years, but it doesn't mean that we don't have standards. Much thought that might amaze some people. What the standards are in the new media, especially on podcasts, is still being worked out, but there must be some. Otherwise, the new media will lead people into errors and evils far greater than the old media could ever dream of. Summation. I got called out for my bullshit, and now we need to we need to make sure that the internet media has standards so that we can filter out people who disagree with me. That's what he's saying here. Now, I have to ask myself, why would he be saying this? Well, here's your answer. Here's why. Dave DeCamp here from antiwar.com just did a little Googling about Douglas Murray visiting Israel. Ha 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 ha. Israel honors British journalist Douglas Murray for support post October 7th. Someone needs to explain to Douglas Murray that visiting a place on a state-sponsored propaganda tour doesn't count as a real visit and doesn't give him any credibility.
You're an anti-Semite.
Here's another take on that as well. Douglas Murray is an Israeli asset. He even received an award from Israeli President Isaac Herzog for propaganda services in the midst of the Gaza genocide. It's an extraordinary privilege for me to align with the state of Israel, gushed Murray at the president's residence. So there you have it. That right there is why he is cuckoo on this issue. But I want to play some video for you as well. Douglas Murray and Mehdi Hasan are kind of against each other on this one issue, but you're going to notice that they actually agree on something because they're both propped up media fucks who have no real skills other than shilling for the people that pay them to shill, which is kind of what the mainstream media is. I think it was Jimmy and Kurt who were talking about how people on the news are just actors that read scripts. They're not journalists. They're just like, hey, my tits look nice. Today in breaking news, that's exact. And so that's what Douglas Murray and Mehdi Hasan are too. They're actors who read scripts for their, handlers. And so this is Mehdi Hasan talking about Douglas Murray, and you're going to see the one thing that they do agree on. And I thought this was funny.
Discussion without bringing up someone who is of great interest to Owen and I, especially on this issue of Israel, and that is a man named Douglas Murray, who has been back in the news recently, not just because Donald Trump endorsed his new book, Defending Israel, but he was on the Joe Rogan podcast. And there's a clip that went viral some of the supporters think it was really good, where he called out a comedian, libertarian comedian, Dave Smith, who's Jewish but anti-Israel, and he said to him, "Have you never been there? Have you never been there? How can you comment on somewhere you've never been to?" And he said, "I make it a rule of my journalism never to talk about a country, even in passing, that I haven't visited." What was your reaction when you saw Douglas Murray say that?
I had a couple of instant responses, I have to say. I think, firstly, so he's never condemned North Korea. Can't condemn North Korea. He's never been there.
Never been there.
Shut up, Douglas. But if...
Literally, he talks about Iran every other week.
All the
He's never
time.
been to Iran, as far as I'm aware.
But, for example, if some pro-Iranian delegation from Britain went to Iran and came back and went, "Oh, it's a wonderful... everyone leave it alone." Or the Stalin Society went to North Korea and came back and went, "Everyone leave North Korea alone, it's great." Would Douglas Murray go, "Well, we need to defer to them. They've been there."
British doctors, Australian doctors, Canadian
great
doctors,
point.
American doctors have gone out and said, "We saw Israelis killing Palestinian kids. We've seen gunshot wounds." Said he doesn't trust them.
What would he say
But
about
he talks about him going out there. I mean, he's gone with, as an embed with the Israeli military. He got given an award by the Israeli president. This is not journalism as anyone understands journalism.
It was a government-organised trip.
Yep. There you go. So even Mehdi Hasan, you'll notice he agrees with him about the expertise thing. We do need to make sure there's expertise, but he also backs up the whole Douglas Murray as a friggin' Israeli asset claim. And just to cap this off nicely, this is Joe Rogan and Tim Dillon talking about the Douglas Murray appearance, recent Douglas Murray appearance.
Hopefully. They keep talking about all this, these deals they're all making. Hopefully that the Hamas and the Israel, whatever it is, they get, because...
Well, that's one thing that Trump said. If I get in there, 24 hours, the war's over.
That's a tough one. 24 is tough.
That's obviously.
But hopefully they figure it out, because it is, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, it's fucking crazy.
The human toll is unreal.
Unreal.
And, it's crazy.
Some lady just died. She was the protagonist in some documentary, and she just got blown up.
There is an argument to be made that level of devastation and death is worse than you talking to someone on your podcast.
Allegedly.
There is an argument to be made. It's probably not a good one.
The amount
but there is an argument
with just talking.
There is an argument to be made that, starvation and stuff like that and people dying is worse than a podcast.
But wait a minute.
I wouldn't make it.
Wait a minute before you say that. Have you been there?
When were you last there at all? I've never been. You've never been?
Well, am I not allowed to talk about it now?
Right, that's a good point.
You haven't been?
By the way, how is he in all these wars? Can I just go to wars? By the way, how are you allowed to just go to wars? Is that the way
you should at least
just
have the
go to
courtesy of going there.
Can I just go to wars, or do I have to come back and say what people want me to say about the wars? Can I go to the wars and have my own opinions, or do I have to have the opinions?
Not if you want to go back.
That's right. It's very interesting, this war tourism. How do I get on this war tourism?
Yeah.
I'd like to go to the Ukraine. I want to go. I want to go. I want to go to all this war tourism.
Do you have any awards that they can melt down and make bullets out of?
Joe, think about this. Do I seem like a guy that has a lot of awards?
Didn't you get one of those YouTube plaques when you hit 100,000?
I don't even know where they send it. I don't know where they're sending those YouTube plaques.
We've got a few of those.
But I like this idea of war tourism. I like the idea of going to a war and then coming back having a very black and white view.
Yes, I've been there.
I get it, and I know, and interesting. Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. I love that.
You feel better than the other people.
Well, of course, there's a lot of people. It gets very murky. Most people I know that have been to war have a very murky, complex view of things. But it is good to go to a war and then come back and be as sure as you were before you came.
And you don't have to go for very long.
No, you go for an hour.
Couple hours.
It's a lunch.
Yeah.
It's lunch on the front line.
Put on a flak jacket that says press.
Tea on the front lines, and then you come back and you have all the talk. Yeah.
And if you're on the right side, you probably don't get shot.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Well, there doesn't seem to be a ton of danger for a lot of these people going to these wars. They seem fine.
If you cross that line and you have a bucket of food with you, they might light you up.
Yeah. No, I'm going to go. I'll go to any war and anything you want. So if you want to pay for me to go to a war, I will come back and I go, I saw the Houthis. They're terrifying. They are terrifying. Any war you want.
So you get the idea. It's patently ridiculous, the claims that Douglas Murray's making. He's an arrogant twat and an asset of Israel. That's proven.
You're an anti-Semite.
I got pictures of him giving him away. Like they're thanking him for his propaganda efforts. What a fucking twat.